Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from.
Bom dia, boa tarde.
This is a webinar that is being convened by the Regional Office of the United Nations Population Fund in East and Southern Africa, UNFPA, the African Institute of Development Policy, AFIDEP, and the Development Policy Research Unit at the University of Cape Town. Okay, I have a bit of a feedback from translation.
Sorry, madam, the languages are okay.
Can we assign the interpreters, please? Can we also assign, take out Yasmin, the one French Yasmin?
And in the interest of time, if you are please joining and you are a speaker, please do rename yourself. And this would be Mr. Jean-Pierre Bokele from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mr. Charles Banda from Zambia, Dr. Betty Kayando from Uganda, and Mr. Vusimusi Maduna. If you're kindly on the line, could you please rename yourself and could you check your email? A specific link has been sent to you. And proceeding, like I said, a very warm welcome to you all to this webinar, this dissemination webinar. My name is Chinwe Obonna and I work with UNFPA in the East and Southern Africa Regional Office. The objective of this webinar is to present and discuss the findings from 2 regional reports that resulted from assessments and reviews of the collaborating entities that I mentioned. One of the reports that we'll be discussing today is the best practices in operationalizing the demographic dividend agenda in East and Southern Africa region. And the second is a review of methodologies and tools that have been used to estimate and analyze the demographic dividend, including the extent to which these methodologies do respond to policy issues in the region. It promises to be a very engaging webinar, and we look forward to engaging with you on the reports as well as beyond on the collective efforts that are required in the region as we march forward towards 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals timeline, as well as the aspirations of the Africa Agenda 2063. 2 very quick administrative announcements. We have interpretation today, simultaneous interpretation in 3 languages, English, French, and Portuguese. To access this interpretation, please click on the interpretation button or the globe icon that is on the lower right of your Zoom screen and select your preferred language, please. You will also note that access to mics and videos are currently not available to reduce the inadvertent interferences from persons that are not speaking. During designated times, the moderator, who I will introduce shortly, will invite participants to raise their hand. But we want to please encourage you that throughout the webinar, please use the chat box to share reflections, contributions, and the moderator will ensure to amplify or respond as required. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's webinar in the person of Mr. Elia Zulu, the Executive Director and Founder of AFIDEP. Elia, over to you, please.
All right, thanks a lot, Chinwe, for opening up the webinar. It's really, as Chinwe said, going to be an exciting discussion. We all know the demographic dividend has been a very, very key development by us since 2013, 2014, when we had the regional conference celebrating ICPD at 20. And at that time, we talked about harnessing the demographic dividend, the future we want for Africa. In 2017, a big milestone, the African Union designated harnessing the demographic dividend through investments in youth as the main development theme of the year. Since then, African countries have done all sorts of activities to operationalize the demographic dividend, to decide on investments, generate evidence, decide on investments that will give the countries the best chance of maximizing the demographic dividend that they can harness. So it's really a very, very important occasion for the East and Southern Africa region that we've come together to look at what has been done over this period, what are the key lessons, and how do we step up the action so that going down the line towards 2030, 2040, 2050, will really place our countries, give our countries the best chances of maximizing the demographic dividend. So I'm going first of all to start this, but before I do that, can I ask all the speakers who are here just to put on your video? I think we need to take a quick picture of the group of speakers who are here. Mine is on. I'll just ask everybody to do that, and there's somebody from Combs AFIDEP, I think you're going to take that picture. Just very, very quickly, 2, 3, 4 seconds, please. Let's see all the speakers put together. Switch on your video. I can see myself, I can see Chinwe. Who else is there? Bernard, are you there? The speakers, we have Beatrice, Monet. It has to be in gallery mode, yeah? All right. Is it Jesse or is it you? I think there's a Jesse Mpande who is there. Yeah. When the picture is taken, please let us know so that we can then move on to the actual content of the meeting. There's one camera that is looking a little bit on the side. This Musi Maduna, I don't know what, your camera is not upright. It's looking like this way. All right, is it done?
It's not from my end. It should be from the host.
All right.
Yes.
I would ask that we all just give a thumbs up to the webinar now, and then we get started. Is the picture taken, Victory?
All right. Let's all say cheese. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Got it.
Sorry for that interruption, but we are getting started now. And at this point, I would like to introduce our first speaker in the first segment, where we're going to have presentations. First of all, an introductory statement from Mrs. Beatrice Muntari, who is the Deputy Regional Director of UNFPA, East and Southern Africa region. After that, we'll have Mr. Jean-Pierre Bokeri, who is the Director of Macroeconomics in the Ministry of Planning in the DRC. After which we'll have a presentation on the best practices on the demographic dividend in the region, which will be made by Dr. Bernard Onyango, who is the Senior Policy and Research Scientist at AFIDEP. And the final one will be made by Dr. Mone. Mone, I always have a hard time pronouncing your last name. By the time you come up, I'll practice it. But Mone from University of Cape Town will come to present on methods for assessing the demographic dividend. So Mrs. Beatrice Muntari, I'll ask you now to give the first opening remarks to get the meeting started from the UNFPA East and Central Africa, East and Southern Africa region. Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you, Mr. Zulu. And I think before I start, I just want to recognize all the directors, or the deputy directors, the assistant directors from various ministries in the region, all the government representatives, representatives from academia, civil society, youth networks, and UN colleagues. It's really nice to see your participation at this very important meeting. From my part, I would like to say it's such a pleasure to be part of this meeting. I've been involved to some extent, or followed some of the progress that those who've really been hands-on in working on this. So it's really exciting to see the progress that has been made in the initiatives that we'll be discussing this afternoon. So just wanted to say a few words really as we move into the external dissemination of two critical reports, reports that demonstrate findings from extensive assessments and analysis that were undertaken between 2020 and 2021. And these reports, which document national efforts towards harnessing the demographic dividend in the Eastern and Southern Africa region, and also further identify best practices across the wide-ranging efforts that are very commendable. As Mr. Zulu alluded to, and I think that many of us here would accept, that there has been significant progress indeed made in making advancement towards harnessing the demographic dividend in this region. Following the adoption of the 2017 Africa Union Roadmap on harnessing the demographic dividend, the roadmap that was developed in 2017, and which really really placed an emphasis on investments in youth. The best practice report and the review of the demographic dividend methodologies not only provide significant information on current and prevailing best practices, but as we will see, they also look into the future actions required to further accelerate progress in the region. We note that demographic diversity continues to have significant impact on country prospects for achieving socio-economic transformation, as all member states strive to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and aspirations of the Africa Agenda 2063 through various national visions and corresponding national development partners. We note that the UN and member states identified rapid changes in demographics as one of the mega trends the world needs to further understand and integrate into tailored programs in the decade of action. We also note that as countries undergo demographic transition, resulting in changes in the population age structure and increases in the working age population relative to the dependent population, there is therefore an urgency to ensure that the countries tap into the window of opportunity to accelerate inclusive and people-centered economic growth. Further, this can only be possible through targeted multi-sectoral investments. In this vein, UNFPA recognizes the role of senior government officials from the Ministries of Finance and National Development and Planning, or their equivalents, who have continued to lead efforts and chart the course in this region. The reports being disseminated today could only be possible considering the continued efforts of member states in collaboration with a wide range of partners. And to this end, we really appreciate the collaborations fostered by the various organizations, UNFPA, the African Institute for Development Policy, AFIDEP, and the University of Cape Town. We certainly look forward to similar collaborations with the academic community in the period ahead, 2022 to 2025, as the world accelerates progress towards addressing the unfinished business of the ICPD agenda, in particular, looking at the transformative results of ending unmet need for family planning, ending preventable maternal deaths, and ending gender-based violence and harmful practices of child marriage and female genital mutilation, just to mention a few. Moving on, I would really like to invite us to actively engage in the discussions during the webinar, which will disseminate best practices across 5 pillars and the review of the methodologies for assessing the prospects and achieving of the demographic dividend. In doing so, we would also encourage the need for continued monitoring and documentation of evolving best practices and to strengthen South-to-South collaboration to ensure meaningful exchange and learning across countries, while also ensuring course corrective actions are taken to protect gains and safeguard against any loss of ground as may be required. In conclusion, we note the reality of the impact of COVID-19 on lives, on livelihoods and economies of nations, with implications for harnessing the demographic dividend. We continue to encourage countries to ensure prioritized investments that ensure continuity of essential services of health, education, protection, sustainable livelihoods, just to mention a few. And we also encourage the need for systems and community resilience, building to anticipate and prepare and respond to future shocks, disruptions, and emergencies. I think with those few words, I'd like to stop there, but really look forward to the discussions that we are going to be having this afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you very much, Mrs. Beatrice Mutali, the Deputy Regional Director for Eastern Southern Africa region, UNFPA, for those really very, very insightful remarks, setting the tone on the importance of this demographic dividend paradigm for the region's development, not only this region, but the whole continent of Africa. So the second person who needed to speak here was Mr. Jean-Pierre Bokheri. As I said, he's the Director of Macroeconomics in the Ministry of Planning in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But it looks like we are still having a challenge in having him join the discussion. So we are going to change unless maybe if Mr. Bokheri, if you are there, please just say something. But if you are still not there, what we're going to do now, we'll get Mr. Bokheri's remarks to come as part of the panel discussion that we'll have a bit later. So at this point, it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Bernard Onyango, who is the Senior Research and Policy Analyst at the African Institute for Development Policy. Bernard actually leads the demographic dividend work at AFIDEP, for him to do a presentation on the best practices in the demographic dividend in the East and Southern Africa region. So Bernard, please take it from there.
Thank you, Eli, and thank you all who have joined this meeting. My task is to really give an overview of the study and match some of the more granular issues that came out of the study will be presented by the panelists. And so, as has already been mentioned, this study was initiated in late 2020. And we then conducted it through into 2021, and we are happy that we are finally at a point where we are able to disseminate it. So this study, of course, comes the backdrop of efforts to accelerate the march towards sustainable development, including the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2063, and also ICPD. And we know that our countries also have their national long-term development strategies and national development plans, and population dynamics are now more than ever very critical to these development plans. As already been mentioned, in 2017, the African Union came up with a roadmap on harnessing the demographic dividend through investments in youth, and member countries were expected to go further and really contextualize and domesticate these roadmaps so that all the member states would have a roadmap towards harnessing the demographic dividend. So the idea around this was to integrate population dynamics into, and this I'm quoting from the meeting in Addis Ababa in 2013, to integrate population dynamics into development planning at the national and sub-national levels in order to comprehensively respond to population and development issues, including population dynamics and its implications for human rights, dignity, quality of life, poverty eradication, and sustainable development. So the key objective of our assessment was to review the performance, but critically identify the lessons learned in operationalizing the demographic dividend through the translation of these into national development plans and implementation frameworks. In terms of methods, we really triangulated, our findings from a combination of stakeholder engagements, desk reviews, where we, amongst others, looked at these cross-sectoral policy documents and strategies, the overall national development plans, and also demographic dividend strategies and roadmaps where they existed. In addition, we did conduct an online survey, which had responses from various stakeholders, including within the countries, members from the different sectors, but also the focal points from UNFPA on population and development. Having done this, we also then identified some key informants. So we had 9 countries from where we conducted key informant interviews, and these included Botswana, the DRC, Kenya, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritius, Rwanda, South Africa, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Critically, in making this choice, we wanted to have, a range of countries with different experiences or at a different points in their demographic transition, but also, in their development process. So we have middle-income countries, we have the low-income countries, and then we also have, countries with high fertility, but also those where fertility has come down significantly, such as is the case in Mauritius. From our analysis, we came up with this particular framework, which really is the heart of that report, and really identified 5 key pillars which are really important in advancing the demographic dividend agenda, to operationalizing demographic dividend roadmaps. So the first pillar is on sustained strategic communication and policy advocacy. That there is need, we wanted to see in all these countries, whether there was sustained advocacy on the demographic dividend at not just the national, but also the sub-national level. But importantly, what was this able to then do in terms of securing influential actors or champions to promote the demographic dividend agenda? Under the second pillar, looking at the development context the development of context-specific guidance on the demographic dividend. So, for example, were these being done under a government-led multi-sectoral organization? And are we, developing DD roadmaps and strategies? So, has the country developed DD roadmaps and strategies? Is there a component of costing DD strategies? Because it's one thing to develop the roadmap and the strategy, but if there is no costing or plans to ensure how it moves forward, then it just remains that on paper. And is there continuous generation of actionable demographic dividend evidence for implementation? On the third pillar, we're looking at integration of DD guidance into policies, sectoral plans, and development plans. So going beyond developing a roadmap or the agenda, what efforts have gone towards making sure that there's the integration of these into population policies, integration into national development plans, and most importantly, integration into the national and sectoral plans, which are also, the implementation plans where now you realize the objectives or you try to operationalize your national development plans. So the fourth pillar, we're looking at the development of strong multi-sectoral implementation and mechanisms. So what are the mechanisms you have to bring stakeholders to the table? As we know, the demographic dividend is not just about one sector. It's not just about population, and it's not just about health, as FAM would see it. In the countries where we are seeing, tangible results, countries where you have the mechanism that brings together actors from the different sectors of the pillars of the demographic dividend, including education, employment, governance, and the likes. And also bringing to the table both state and non-state actors at national and subnational level. And then what are the efforts towards strengthening population and demographic dividend coordination agencies and mechanisms at both the national and subnational level? Critically, there's the pillar number 5, which is monitoring, evaluation, and accountability frameworks. Are these in place for the demographic dividend agenda to guide the design of interventions and the monitoring of results, and of course to guide also course correction? And in terms of our findings, which I'll get to just shortly and highlight, what I wanted to say of the countries in the East and Southern Africa region that we looked at, all the countries within the East and Southern Africa region, very few of them, seemed to be doing well on all the pillars. Some were doing better on one pillar or the other, for example, on advocacy and communication, but not monitoring, evaluation, and accountability. And in fact, as you progress all the way to the monitoring, evaluation, and accountability, you realize that very few have managed to get to that point, although there are very good lessons from the different countries on these issues. So in terms of, where do we go in terms of looking at the evidence that we synthesized? Advocacy and communication are still a big part of the demographic dividend agenda. While we might think that since, this became a priority at the AU in 2017, for example, and countries took it up, there's still much to be done on communication and advocacy. And some countries have done better than others. For example, in Malawi, there have been efforts towards really engaging with the traditional leaders to talk about and actually understand and amplify the demographic dividend at those grassroots level. Continuous evidence generation to inform and guide implementation is critical. For the most part, most of the countries have now conducted some kind of study or assessment of the demographic dividend, mainly using the method of the national transfer account, which my colleague is going to talk about after this, and the DEMDIV. But then there is need to continue doing this process. So it more often than not, it has been done as a one-off process, and then it takes a while before moving on to integrate new aspects coming in. Then the next one is, the integration of DD into national development plans and strategies. without integrating the demographic dividend into the development plans and strategies, you really are not going to move forward. And there are a number of countries now, an increasing number of countries that are doing this, but I give the example of Uganda, Kenya, who have done this. But even as we speak, more countries are getting on board. For example, the Botswana is currently in the process of developing a roadmap which would help it integrate the demographic dividend into national development plans and strategies. And then the issue of multi-stakeholder collaboration, which is really critical, as I mentioned before. And lessons are to be learned from countries like Uganda, where they've been very specific there've been very specific efforts towards making sure that this happens under the organization of the population council there. That's very critical as with the convening power to bring different stakeholders on board. And then finally, they need to develop and implement monitoring and accountability mechanisms. Looking at all the countries in the region, this is an area of weakness, I think serious weakness, with very few countries having gotten to this stage. We can, for example, point out to a country like South Africa that has very robust or fairly robust monitoring and accountability mechanisms around the issues of population and development, working hand in hand, the population unit there, working hand in hand with Statistics South Africa to generate evidence that would enable them to do this. So, and also working with academia, including the University of Cape Town. So these are the key areas of recommendation for where that can amplify the demographic dividend agenda going into the future and taking opportunity of the momentum that we have now before it wanes. And finally, just to point out, and this region as UNFPA East and Southern Africa region has also been very keen to understand what are the emerging realities that could affect the opportunities to harness the demographic dividend, including COVID-19 and climate change. And there is some strand of work that has been done in the region on this.
So Bernard, I think we need to wrap up.
So with that, I want to stop.
Yeah, sure.
So you got me on the cusp of stopping. So thank you. And we look forward to the discussions going forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bernard, Dr. Bernard Onyango, for presenting there the highlights from this report. The report really has a lot of rich materials. It has charts that are showing where many countries have gotten, and in all those pillars, how far countries have gone, and we come to the conclusion that every country has made some sort of progress, but there are three countries that seem to have done the most under those pillars. We look at Uganda, we look at Zambia, we look at Kenya, and as the countries that have probably gone the farthest in all those places. So it's a very, very important read to look at. But now I'm going to shift to the next presenter, and I think one thing that is clear in the presentation Bernard made in the remarks that Mrs. Beatrice Muntari made earlier is the critical importance of evidence to inform the demographic dividend agenda. Without evidence, we can't really, guide policies and programs properly. So one of the exercises that was done was really to look at the methods for estimating and informing DD practices in the region, and this was based on the review that was done by our colleagues from the University of Cape Town. And so I'm going to call upon Moni, who is from the University of Cape Town, to actually give a presentation on the highlights on this analysis or review of the methodologies for the demographic dividend. Moni.
Great, thanks very much. I'm just going to share my presentation. Okay, great. Thanks very much. So yes, this is really a presentation around work that we've been doing in terms of tools and models for the demographic dividend. And so I'm just really, given the short amount of time, I'm just going to try and give you a sense of what we have been doing. So really, what we know is that there is, over the past few years, has been increased focus on the demographic dividend and on creating a supportive policy environment in many African countries. And this is often, the prospect of the demographic dividend is often seen as one of the ways in which countries and policymakers can begin to address some of the development challenges that they face. But obviously policymaking is difficult, and it is difficult for a number of reasons. And I've just listed a couple of them here. I think one of the big challenges really is around long lead times. So it takes a long time for an implemented policy to have an impact. And so it might take several years before one is able to get a sense really of the kinds of impact that the policy is having. A second issue, and it's something that we're all grappling with at the moment, really is the prospect of shocks. And so we know, for example, for the COVID is a really good example. And so these are things that we cannot plan for, right? So as policymakers, you can make the best plans, but these shocks can really cause chaos in terms of your planning. And the third issue is maybe a little bit more technical, but really I think one of the big challenges that we face is when we are looking at the data that's available. Often it's at an aggregated level or it's averaged across groups. And so really this kind of data makes it quite difficult from a policy perspective to get a sense of this wide range of experiences and contexts that face people within the country. So this is different groups really are facing different challenges. And so in terms of the demographic dividend, it really is important then to be aware of the different tools and methodologies that are available. And really, I think what is key is to understand what questions these tools are able to answer. And so that's really what this report is about. And I think, so just moving on, it's really important to keep in mind a couple of things around tools and models and frameworks in general, but then in particular with respect to the demographic dividend. The first is that these are simplified representations of really complex phenomena. So we really are trying to make sense in some way of these very complex phenomena. And so we have to simplify in order to create these tools and models. And so it is really important when you're using them to realize that these really are simplifications of reality. Linked to this is the idea that when using these models, one has to trade off complexity and level of detail against accessibility and ability to communicate results, especially to non-technical audiences. So you can have a very complex model and a very highly detailed model or tool, but it then comes at a cost, and it becomes much more difficult to communicate the results. And it also becomes difficult for people to use, non-specialists to use the model. A third issue around this is that they can become outdated over time. So these models and tools are really built using a lot of data in many cases. And so as time passes, they may become outdated. And then the fourth issue, which I think is quite relevant in the current context, is that these models and tools vary in the extent to which they rely on either country-specific data or cross-country data. And so some models would be very much reliant on cross-country data, others are much more reliant on country-specific data. In terms of what questions can be answered, it's clear that there are a lot of questions that we might have around the demographic dividend from a policy perspective. I've put a couple down here. The first is what is the expected magnitude of the demographic dividend over a specific period of time? So it's a lot of these questions are really around the magnitude of the dividend. How big will it be? How big is it in relation to dividends that we see in other countries, or relative to the growth that we're already seeing within the country? So this is really a sort of a measurement type of question. A second type of question is around the context that we're operating in. So what kind of context is supportive of realizing a demographic dividend? So what kind of policies and contextual variables are important? And these can be, again, a range of variables. So economic, social, institutional, and so on. The third sort of set of questions is around policy interventions. So what kinds of policy interventions can one implement as a government to boost the demographic dividend? So really, it's, in a sense, is combining these two the first two questions around size and context, and it's really trying to sort of move the analysis forward in terms of policy interventions. So this report really looks at the extent to which these different approaches are flexible enough to answer questions really in three main areas. The first area that we've really looked at, and I think it's particularly relevant within the region, is around inequality. When we talk about inequality, obviously many of the world's most unequal countries at the moment are within the region. And so here we're really talking about the degree of inequality. So what is sort of to what extent can these tools address questions around the degree of inequality, but then importantly, differences between groups. And so this sort of speaks to the question that I was talking about earlier around averages and aggregate data obscuring differences between groups. So can these tools give us a sense of what's going on for different groups? The second set of questions that the report looks at in terms of the models is around domestic policy choices. So to what extent can we reflect specific policy choices, whether it be in the area of population or labor market policy or economic policy? To what extent can these policy choices be reflected within the tool and within the model? And then thirdly, to what extent are these tools able to deal with these kinds of exogenous factors? So these events over which policymakers have little to no control, and there COVID is the classic example at the moment. Importantly, what the models are able to do depends really on the structure of the tool or the model. The first question really is around whether a particular event or a change can be translated into a measurable impact on a particular variable within the tool. And so this really, if a model is unable to translate a particular event or change into a measurable impact, it cannot answer questions around that particular issue. This can be done directly. So if, for example, we want to know about how might fertility impact the issues around the demographic dividend, if the model takes fertility as a direct input, we can measure this directly. But we can also measure some of these things indirectly. So for example, if we want within national transfer accounts, for example, if we want to say what might the impact be of addressing youth unemployment, we can model that indirectly within NTA. The approaches that are available really range from very simple approaches to very complex approaches. And they take Some of them will take very few inputs in terms of data and variables, and others will take many inputs. And that obviously impacts the extent to which the model can answer particular questions. Lastly, there is no model or tool or framework that can answer all questions. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind when we talk about the demographic dividend. It's also important to recognize that sometimes there is no model that is capable of answering a very particular question. So this is my last slide. In terms of the review of methodologies, the report itself, we considered 4 broad types of approaches, and we looked at 2 examples of these in greater depth. The first approach was the dependency ratio approach. So I think all of us are familiar with that, but it's really getting at the demographic dividend through dependency ratios derived from population data. This is a very simple approach. It has a single data input in essence. It does have a very abrupt switch between dependence and non-dependence. So when you switch from 14 to 15 or from 59 to 60 or 64 to 65, whenever you're cutting it off, it's a very abrupt switch. And it offers almost no foothold for policy analysis. So because it's very super simple, it doesn't get us very far in terms of policy. The second set of approaches is simulation models like the DemDiv model. Here, it really is the simplified representation of reality. It is very much, these models are often very much reliant on historical and cross-country relationships. And so we really are talking about average effects observed across countries, and we're using that to model country-specific effects. These models are often they're often easier to communicate. They're very useful from a policy perspective in terms of engaging with policymakers, but they have a challenge where the updating of the model is often done centrally. So it's not necessarily easy for users to update. National transfer accounts are much more data intensive, but it does allow sort of a gradual switch between dependence and non-dependence. A very useful aspect of national transfer accounts is that demographic dividend is not its primary focus, so it does have various other uses that are useful in the context in the region. It uses country-specific data, and I think that's a very strong strength of the approach. All the data that goes in is country-specific. Updating is decentralized, so countries can update the NTA estimates themselves. The fourth set of approaches is around regressions and decomposition approaches. These are really around estimating statistical relationships from historical data, and really for a specific set of countries for a specific period of time. And so they're very much tied into the time and the context in which they've been measured. These are very data intensive approaches, and they really are sort of mostly used for estimating these relationships, but then also identifying the different channels. So this is just a quick overview really of what we discuss in the paper. If you want any more detail, I would really recommend taking a look at the report. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you very much, Moni, for that presentation, highlighting the methodologies. As I said at the beginning, evidence is very, very critical for shaping the demographic dividend agenda. And I think it's good to see that there are a lot of tools that can be used there, but a lot of the evidence also has to be generated from the different sectors, because what we need to know is what do we need to do in education to reform education? What do you need specifically to do to reform the health sector, to create the more jobs that are needed? And some of these are things that may not really come from modeling. So when we are looking at the evidence that is needed to inform the agenda moving forward, it's really a whole range of evidence, but it's critical to see the specific models that we can use to map what's going on the demographic dividend. I think there was a note in the chat that Mr. Jean-Pierre Bokeri might be on now. Are you on now? Would you like just to say the remarks if you are there? Pauline, you had said that somebody had contacted him. Otherwise, I think I'm going to shift gear now to the next part of this discussion. Again, I think Chinwe mentioned at the beginning, encouraging all of you to type in notes if you want to ask questions on some aspects of what has been presented by Dr. Mone and Dr. Bernard. Please feel free to type in comments there. At the end, I'll sample some of the questions and maybe ask the panelists to come up and say something. So now we're going to get examples from the countries that exhibited good work in some of the pillars that are in the pillars that Bernard talked about. If you look at the report, there's a section of the report that summarizes the key lessons that have been learned. And as Bernard said, they really focus more on targeted, ongoing, sustainable countries that have gotten targeted, ongoing, and sustainable advocacy have really done very well. Those that have built on existing developmental frameworks really put the demographic dividend, whether it's a long-term development visions, they have also taken the agenda forward more, where the coordination mechanisms are very, very strong. And I think the three countries, one thing we will know, the three countries I mentioned, all these three have population councils, which are specifically meant to help coordinate population activities. The fourth key factor was incorporation of the demographic dividend in national and subnational development plans and budgets. And finally, it's the strength of the monitoring and evaluation systems. We know, like now, Botswana is starting a program where they want to do a roadmap, but already start from the point of putting that in the national M&D system. So now I'm going to call upon four members of four speakers from the countries that really exhibited very, very good performance in specific areas. And we're going to start with Kenya. And my main question really is to ask each of the panelists to share the enablers and success drivers that led to the good or best practice in the area that was identified for the specific country. So we'll start off with Zambia, where Mr. Charles Banda, who is the Director, Department of Population and Development in Zambia, is going to talk about the specific best practice or good or best practice we observed in Zambia, which was the generation of continuous evidence to inform and guide implementation processes. Mr. Banda, please, you have your 5 minutes to say something on that, highlighting what you've done in Zambia.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, like you have already indicated, my name is Charles Banda, Director, Population and Development, Zambia. The number one issue that we did to ensure that we have the data is we started subnational analysis of our data using census and other sources of data, to where we are able to check. And also the other enabler is the act that happened in 2020 of planning and budgeting, where there were pertinent issues that population issues must be at the center of development for us to harness the demographic dividend. And maybe the last one that we have done now is, which is waiting for the minister to approve, is to come up with the demographic dividend, harnessing the demographic dividend operational plan, where all stakeholders were involved. And I think lastly is what we are thinking for the coming year is for us to do what a method that is called the demographic dividend effort index. So we'll go into details ourselves on what we intend to do with that method, and be able also to give maybe further answers on what is happening. Thank you for now.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Banda, for highlighting what Zambia has done, and I think the key steps, the evidence at subnational level for planning, but also you've now developed this operational plan that has involved all the actors. And I think what's clear in Zambia is that the momentum is continuing. So there are some countries where a bit of work was done and then things stalled. And I think the countries where we are seeing that things that have gone the farthest are the ones that are really continuing the momentum of really the work and engaging various stakeholders. So a good example there from Zambia. The next question, still the same question, going now to Kenya, to Mr. Francis Kundu, who is the Assistant Director at the Assistant Director for Population at the National Council for Population and Development in Kenya, is going to talk to us about really what he sees still as the enablers and success drivers that led to the good practice in Kenya, which we are really highlighting as integration of DD into the national development plans and strategies. So Francis, if you just highlight what Kenya has done on this and what has stood out in terms of what the country and how far you've gone. Francis.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and also for this opportunity that you've given us to be able to highlight what Kenya has done. Maybe for Kenya, in terms of ensuring that we are able to domesticate and implement the demographic dividend in the country, it has been quite a journey trying to make sure that we have the demographic dividends in our plans. And this journey started way back in 2014. And there we were able to do the modeling for the country. And from this modeling, we were able to see that Kenya has the potential to be able to attain a demographic dividend. So using this evidence from the model, we were able to create awareness, especially among policymakers, so that they may buy into this idea. But on top of that, we kept asking ourselves, what do we need to do to ensure that all the counties, because we have county governments in the country, 47 of them, what can we do to ensure that county governments come on board so that if county governments buy into the DD, then the country as a whole will be able to attain the demographic dividend. So one important step which we did is to be able to undertake a national adolescence and youth survey in the country. And the purpose of doing this survey was to be able to find out in the key 4 sectors of DD, what are the issues affecting each specific county. And once we did that, we were able to get information which is county specific. And using that information, then we were able to know exactly what priorities each county needs to give. We also mentioned here that the AU came up with a roadmap for the continent for DD. We also domesticated this. We looked at the AU roadmap and we domesticated this and came up with a Kenya demographic dividend roadmap. Now, in this roadmap, we were able to highlight priority strategies and actions that the country needs to implement, both at national level and county level. So with this roadmap, then we were providing a guide to both the national government as well as national county governments on what they. Sorry for the interruption. So we developed the demographic dividend roadmap.
We still seem to be losing you, Francis, there.
Okay, am I back?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Now, we revised the demographic dividend roadmap because of a few changes which took place in the frameworks that were guiding development in the country. And specifically, we came up with new plans, the Big 4 agenda for the country. We also had the ICPD conference in Nairobi, where Kenya came up with about 17 commitments. We also did a population census in 2019. And from these census, we were able to see how the population structure of the country looks like, both at national and county level. And this is what now informed us on what we needed to do in terms of revising the demographic dividend roadmap that we had. So we had the demographic dividend roadmap in 2017, and we revised it in 2020, and we are hoping that this will take us up to 2030. So with all this information that we have, the next step that we did was to develop a guide, a specific guide for each of the county governments, because we had the second generation of the county development plans, which were being developed in 2018. And we took that opportunity to ensure that demographic dividend issues are actually captured in all these plans. So we developed a guide which we were able now to disseminate and share with the county governments. And using that guide, all the county governments were able to ensure that they have demographic dividend issues within their plans, and that those plans are took them from 2018 and they're supposed to end in 2022. The other thing which we have also seen as a result of providing this guide is that we had the development of the Kenya Youth Development Policy. This is a new policy which was developed with the purpose of ensuring that youth are enabled to participate effectively in the country's development. And what we have seen is that as this document was being developed, issues of demographic dividend were specifically captured in that document. And in addition to that, the country is also reviewing the national population policy to come up with a new policy. And this new policy is also capturing explicitly issues of demographic dividend. So these are some of the efforts that we have made as a country to ensure that demographic dividend is domesticated. So we are seeing an increasing number of documents that are coming up, recognizing the key role that DD can play in terms of advancing the country's development. And we are really glad that it's happening. But next year again, we are having the new development plans, the national development plan, as well as the county plans coming in place. So it will give us an opportunity again to be able to review what have these counties done and what can they do to improve their plans in the coming days. So I think in a nutshell, that's what I would say is what Kenya has done in terms of trying to ensure that we integrate demographic dividend in our plans, both at national and county level. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Francis Kundu there for illustrating what Kenya is doing, especially in terms of incorporating the demographic dividend in policies, not only at national level, but even the subnational governments, the county governments that, you know, came into being in Kenya after 2010. So thanks a lot for that. We're going to move on now to Uganda, where I'm going to call upon Dr. Betty Kiondo, who is the Director for Family Health at the National Population Council in Uganda. And one of the things that were identified in Uganda, of course, Uganda also did a lot of work at subnational level and so on, but one critical thing was the strengthening multi-stakeholder collaboration and coordination, making sure that, you know, you're not just, it's not just the population unit or people in the population sector, but you're bringing along all the other players, you know, over the period. So Dr. Betty Kiando, if you just, again, in less than 5 minutes, just share the enablers and success drivers that led Uganda really to mobilize stakeholders in a way that you've done, please, Betty.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zulu, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Opportunity to speak about our interventions towards harnessing the demographic dividend using the multi-sectoral approach.
Betty, if I can just interrupt, if the speakers are able to put the video, that's fine. But if you feel like you want to speak without the video, that's fine as well, just to encourage that people are able to see who is speaking. Thank you.
Let me first ask Dr. Zulu, are you able to hear me speak?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly well.
Yeah, please allow me speak without the video because it will interrupt my network and I don't want to break off.
That's fine. Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much for allowing that. So what Uganda has done through the multi-sectoral approaches, first of all, we realized that population issues in general, not only the demographic dividend, are cross-cutting. So you find these issues in health, in education, in community development, in social development, in all different aspects of development. So one of the key success areas that we can report on in terms of getting the country to harness the demographic dividend is integrating the demographic dividend through the multi-sectoral approach at both national level, but also at the local government levels. So for this particular year, Uganda has changed the framework of planning from last year, actually, from the sector approach to the program-based approach, where different sectors work as a program to support attainment of certain results. And therefore, our the third national development plan, which is supposed to contribute towards achieving our Vision 2040, has packaged the development framework in a multi-sectoral approach using the program-based planning and budgeting. So this has made it easy for us to work with different sectors to achieve one result. Because we all know that achieving the demographic dividend definitely requires aspects of demographic transition, which is broad, because what does it mean to achieve a demographic transition? We definitely need to rapidly decline fertility and mortality. And therefore, we need to ensure that family planning services are available, commodities, but we also know we need to keep our girls in school. We also know that we need to ensure that there is improved child survival. We know that we need to ensure that there is improved urbanization, and all these are in different sectors. So supporting sectors to work towards reducing fertility and mortality rapidly means that we must work in a collaborative manner and therefore a multi-sectoral approach. And then when we look at health, so to say, the things that we need to focus on is ensuring that, first of all, the disease burden in Uganda is mainly preventable. And therefore, this means if we are to prevent these illnesses, health cannot work alone to support health prevention or health promotion, because we have a whole sector, which is the sector on gender and community mobilization, which is independent of health, that is supposed to mobilize communities and support mindset change so that communities can demand for services, communities can participate, communities can demand for social accountability. So what we have done is ensuring that health promotion and also community development work together towards disease prevention. And then when it comes to issues of keeping children in school, especially the girls, and now that COVID has taught us so much about why girls are getting pregnant while at home, then there is a lot that has to be done through the multi-sectoral approach, which will contribute towards harnessing the demographic dividend. So in a nutshell, we have realized that working in an integrated manner, supporting a multi-sectoral approach is one of the ways to go. And we are also privileged. And we think we are lucky that this time the National Development Plan, which is being implemented right from 2020 to year 2025, is supporting the program-based approach, which is speaking more towards a multi-sectoral approach to harnessing the demographic dividend. And thank you, and over to you, Chair.
All right, thanks a lot there, Betty. I think somebody sent me a yellow card that you've worked with Betty for over 10 years, but you are mispronouncing her last name. So it's Dr. Betty Kiadondo, not what I said before.
That is acceptable, Dr. Zulu. You're multinational, Kenya, Malawi, Uganda, everywhere. So you have so many things to learn, and the brain doesn't grow bigger at that age. So it's acceptable, and I am not offended.
Thank you very much. Thank you for highlighting actually the multi-sectoral approach that Uganda has followed. And finally, the final speaker is going to be Mr. Vusimusi Maduna, who is the Deputy Director for Population Policy Strategy, Monitoring and Evaluation Directorate in the National Population Unit, the Department of Social Development in South Africa. And one of the key things, I think Bernard also mentioned this, South Africa, really one thing that is unique is the strength of the Monitoring and Evaluation Unit, the culture of impact evaluations entrenched within the government system itself. So again, in less than 5 minutes, Mr. Maduna, if you can just explain what was really the main enabler and the success driver on this issue about development and implementation of a monitoring and accountability framework to assess the course-correct actions towards sustainable development in the system in relation to DD. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Dr. Zulu. I think first and foremost, we know that it is, crucial to, sorry, it's very noisy where I am. We can
actually hear you okay, so continue, please.
Yes, okay, thanks. No, it is important, first and foremost, to recognize that the demographic dividend, it is, the lens through which, as developing countries, we look into the future. So therefore, establishing and building sound M&E systems on the DD, it's very critical, for especially guiding us as, developing countries in terms of our interventions and enhancing our countries' reporting on progress towards attaining, the demographic dividend, both at a subnational, national, and regional, as well as global level. So, the M&E systems would actually enable us again to be able to track and trace, policy and program areas in which we are actually doing well and where we are not doing well in areas such as health, education, economic and governance, and so that we can be able to make the necessary, improvements and adjustments. So establishing these DD M&E systems would also, help us, in terms of ensuring that, we are accountable, or there is accountability and transparency, because of the prominence that, the M&E as a discipline places on the participation and the involvement of, constituency at all phases of M&E, and to ensure the relevance, and also, it is also important that, in terms of accountability, that the results that are shared, are not only shared, are not only confined to program, staff and donors, but they're also, shared with, governments that seeks, these results for better assessments of, the assistance that is being provided to their people. And also what we have also learned is that, the M&E process also, it ensures that there is, inclusivity, meaning that no one is left behind, especially, that we account for information on, on children, youth, women, and older people, as well as persons with disabilities. So what we have also learned is that, the M&E, process, what it also does, it encourages or promotes the public-private partnerships, which are, important, not only in ensuring the relevance of the program, but they can also enhance the M&E data and strategies that are employed, because they tend to, in their nature, they tend to bring, more finances, or more financial resources that are required to enhance the scope and the rigor of the assessment. And what is also important is that, this M&E process is that what we have also learned is that M&E is evolving in its nature. It's not, stagnant. So it forces you to actually, begin to use, the new technological, advances, and also it also, allows, one to actually begin to, incorporate some of the, local, methodologies that are existing, that in order to enhance, some of the methods and approaches that, are, Western methods in terms of their nature. So it allows that these two methods, these approaches to complement, one another. So in terms of the South African context, again, in terms of, how we have actually done the monitoring and evaluation of the DD, is that we have, developed a guide tool, which is, a framework that we use to monitor the integration of, the DD both at the national and at the local, government level. And this we have done in collaboration with the ministries of cooperative governance, local government, the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, as well as Statistics South Africa, and the academics from the universities that provide population and development studies, and also leveraging on the partnership that we have with the UNFPA. And also we did a whole advocacy drive on the importance of integrating the DD in development plans. But I think what is also important just to highlight is that having or building M&E system tools for the demographic dividend is not enough, but it also requires that investments are made towards, having access to reliable and timely disaggregated, as well as internationally comparable data. So we know that in many of our countries, the collection of demographic data, as well as data on health, education, and employment, is mostly conducted by external agencies through as well as the support from international organizations. So, and sometimes large or irregular intervals. So, since many surveys often do not cover the whole population, and the collected data may provide an insufficient basis for mapping the needs of the entire population. So what is more is that data is often not processed and analyzed sufficiently, and due to lack of, interpretation skills, and not utilized for, planning processes. So these are some of the challenges. Therefore, there is a need to ensure that, there is national ownership, and, there's also a need to ensure that, we strengthen the capacities of public as well as private sector with regards to the collection and the analysis of demographic data. And just to close, Chair, is that there is, a need to close the gaps that have been repeatedly, reiterated ever since the adoption of the ICPD program of action. And as well, this was also emphasized by, at the Nairobi summit, that it is, very important that, an emphasis was put on, these building up, M&E systems for the integration of, the DD. No, thanks, Chair. Back to you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mr. Maduna, for that very clear presentation on the role of evidence, M&E systems, and making sure that these systems are actually informing decisions, and that they should be both at national, but even the subnational levels of government. Just a quick note, I'm not seeing any comments or questions in the chat box. I can quickly allow one or two people, if you want to raise your hand to say something. I'm not sure, Victoria, do the participants have access to voice? I'm not 100% sure, but if anybody wants to jump in, ask a question, please type it in the chat. Some participants asked for the reports to be shared. The reports have been posted in the chat box, but they're also going to be emailed to everybody who was invited to be part of this process. So I'm not seeing any comments there to give, but I would like to just take this opportunity to thank the presenters. First of all, starting with Mrs. Beatrice Mutali, who gave us the opening remarks, Dr. Bernard Onyango and Dr. Moni. I think I have to give an attempt to Moni. You can give me a red card next time we meet, but Moni Ostuzen, is it? You can give me the red card then. But then we came down to talk about the country experiences. Mr. Charles Banda from Zambia. We had Mr. Francis Kundu from Kenya, Dr. Betty Kiadondo from Uganda, and finally, Mr. Vusimusi Maduna from South Africa. Really, I think these examples, to me, just listening to this, it just shows that the demographic dividend agenda is still alive. Countries are moving forward. And those countries where, it was a big buzz, maybe we got ministers, in some cases, even presidents to come and talk about this, and then the momentum kind of died off. I think we can learn from what we've heard here, that if the push continues, if the momentum continues, if the multi-sectoral engagement continues, it's possible that we can actually move towards harnessing the demographic dividend. So, I mean, the question really you have to ask yourself is really from, we started off, as I said, 2013, 2014, then a big push in 2017 where each and every African leader went to Addis Ababa to talk about the DD. And then after that, we have to ask ourselves, how have we carried this forward? The examples show that we've done it at different levels. The analysis shows that countries have moved forward at different levels, but there are key lessons that we can learn to move really from rhetoric to action. And we've seen how having the evidence on the table has been important. Incorporation into development policies is important, but that can also be seen as an act of ticking the box. If what we want to do is to say, oh, our country, we did a study, the minister launched a study, now we've put it in the 5-year development plan or the 40-year national development strategy. If we don't do anything, it will just end up being, a tick in that box, a tick in the strategy. And the examples we are hearing here is that countries that have continued to galvanize all stakeholders and so on, strengthen their coordination mechanisms, gone beyond just ticking the box that it's in the development strategy to actually start integrating it into development plans, action plans, and budgets, both at national and regional level. Those are the countries that are really moving forward. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we learn from each other? In some cases, what are the practical steps that countries need to take to move the agenda forward? We can talk about integrating DD in development plans, but how do you do it at a practical level? How do you engage with the various sectors at the district development committees and so on? The examples from Uganda, partly from Zambia, demonstrate that this can be done. And the issue about now accountability platforms. If we don't have platforms where we hold each other to account, we develop indicators, put these into the M&D systems, and use the data to actually look at the progress and see how to move forward, we are going to have challenges. So for me, as somebody who has worked on the demographic dividend over the years, I'm really very, very proud to see the region bring together these experiences. We now know where various countries are. There are a lot of opportunities for countries to learn from each other. And as I hand over now to Dr. Angela Bashiri to close this discussion, I would just like to give a big thanks maybe to the team that worked together on this on these exercises from UNFPA. We have Dr. Angela Bashiri herself, Mrs. Chinwe Obana, and Mr. Wilson Diek. We worked together from, when was that? Beginning of 2020. AFIDEP, we had Dr. Bernard Onyango, Sahra Mohammed, Jesse Mpande, Eunice Mweni, Victor Kantuzi, and a couple of other people in communications. And from UCT, Mone was the person. So it has been a team effort. The aim really going forward is to see how we build from the lessons we have here to now apply them and see where the gaps are to make sure that the region is really going to continue the momentum. As you all remember, this is where the DD agenda was born. When in 2014, President Museveni came up and said, now I see the point. It's not just about numbers, it's about the quality of the population. So we are the region that has done a lot of work. And I think the analysis shows that there's really a lot of work that has been done. Let's learn from each other and see how we can build this and really help our countries in the region harness, maximize the demographic dividend that we can harness. Angela, I will now call upon you to give us the closing remarks. Dr. Angela Bashiri from Angela is the I think you are the P&D, the head
yes,
of P&D.
thank you, Elias. Yes. I'm the Population Dynamic Advisor at the regional office. And let me, on behalf of UNFPA, to thank all the panelists, speakers, and all the national stakeholders for their participation in this webinar, as well as their participation in this important review process. Your expertise and insight really help on the edification of the best practice on DD and to support the acceleration moving forward. In UNFPA, we have supported the profiling of DD study over the last 4 years, and so it's important for us to see the taking stock, so the best practice that we have received so far, and how can we support the technical work. We would like to thank also AFIDEP, University of Cape Town, for their continual collaboration and support and commitment in this technical work. Next week, we will have another webinar on methods on NTA, and the University of Cape Town will send the registration link in the coming days, where we will dive a bit deeper on methodology, on how NTA can be applied in different contexts. And then going to our new program cycle in 22-25, UNFPA, we will continue to strengthen the technical policy and programmatic work to harness the DD in the region. This will include supporting some in-depth technical analysis to support the effectiveness of policy, support the advancement of methodology and tools to track progress on DD, and continue the support and share learning of the best practice in the region. And as you know, next year we will start the process of reviewing the Addis Ababa Declaration on Population Development at 10, and UNFPA will continue to support and work with partners for the achievement of the aspiration of the agenda, of the African Agenda 2063. So I thank you again for your participation, and stay tuned for more work, and thank you again for all speakers, collaborators in this piece of work. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.